Before we get started with the main drawings on this DVD, let's talk about a few basic elements. This first one is shading, and in this first circle I'm hatching. I'm going to show 3 different techniques here, although 2 of them will undoubtedly look exactly identical to each other because my ADD on this first ball kicked in too soon and I went against my statement, which was to make the entire ball nothing but shade lines with using hatching only. I've gone against myself and I've done some cross hatching as I'm doing right now. Hatching would be taking all of the strokes and pulling them in one direction, from the light side to the dark side, all the way into the reflected light and into the cast shadows. From corner to corner on that page, whatever I design on the page is all going to be shaded in the same direction. That would be hatching. The objective of shading something in is to make it feel three-dimensional. So as I'm shading this shadow pattern in, what I'm looking for is a flatness, trying to define the entire shadow pattern with one tone in the very beginning. And that one tone helps me see whether or not I have what looks like a light source hitting an object that has a certain quality to it, in this case a spherical quality. The edge between the light and the dark that I'm creeping up to in the middle of the ball is called the terminator. The terminator is where the light and the dark meet, and is where the shadow pattern begins, and sometimes along that edge you'll see something called a core shadow. What I'm developing now has the illusion of a core shadow, although I'm not going to be building one up too drastically within any of these balls because they are all dark, sitting on a very black object, and the black surface is not allowing any reflected light or very little reflected light to fill in the shadowy side. If there's very little reflected light, you won't have a punctual core shadow, or you won't have a band between the light and the dark that looks even darker. A core shadow is a surface that's facing more towards your eyes than any of the other surfaces on the object, and that surface is facing towards your eyes in the same space where the light source is falling away or ending on that surface. So you could say that it's the apex of the surface before it retreats into the shade. And that core shadow tells a few different things. 1, it tells about the type of object that we're looking at. And 2, it tells about the volume of that object that's sticking out or coming forward towards us. If you develop up all of the tones on the surface correctly, then what you build in 2 dimensions will look like it's 3-dimensional. So here I'm back to hatching again, and this was my main intention of this ball, was to take all of the tones and pull them in one consistent direction. Now I'm going to do another thing here that I did not mean to do, and that is use my fingers to smudge out some of these tones. My intention was to use a nice hard pencil and shade everything in so that the tones themselves, just by the pencil tip, have a nice ambient quality to them and fall off in nice gradations. Another problem that I have is that I like to dig into the pictures that I draw and use everything from my elbows to my eyeballs, to rub, to smudge, to blend, to build additions to anything that I'm drawing. I really get into it. And there is a problem with using your fingers. On a paper like the paper that I'm using here, which is smooth newsprint being 6 degrees from toilet paper, which means cheap paper, this newsprint is very fragile, and anything that's oily, like our bodies, will ruin the surface. So the more I use my fingers on this surface, the more I'm rubbing my oils into the surface and damaging the paper. 2 things are happening. The first is that I'm embedding oil into the paper, and any tone that's in between the oil and the paper is not going to rub out very easily or at all. Even using the strongest of erasers won't help. The other problem is that where I'm rubbing my finger over the surface, I'm also pulling the fabric apart, or the weave apart, on the paper. That is, all of the little fibers that create this surface have been woven together in such a way, and by using my finger I'm disrupting that surface and causing abrasion to it, which is pulling it up and ruining that particular space. So 3/4 of my pad is now going to have, or 3/4 of my page is now going to have a nice smoothness to it, and in the areas that I've used my fingers there's going to be a roughness to it. So as I started with a smooth sheet of newsprint, I've now ended with a rough and smooth sheet of newsprint. So yes, you can see that I tried really hard to do some hatching throughout the entire drawing, but I kept coming back to cross-hatching. I broke my course of action here. That was not a good thing to do. But you can see that the end goal here is to create a unity on the surface, to get all the tones to join together to create sort of a continuum of tone. And that continuum goes from the lightest side to the darkest side. It goes from the front all the way around to the back. And if you shade these surfaces in the right way, you will have an audience believing that what they're looking at is three-dimensional. So, fingers aside, you really do want to learn how to use your materials so that you can create nice, smooth, even tones, or nice linear drawings, or nice tonal drawings, or on and on and on. A pencil is very versatile. There's a lot of different things that you can learn with it. But you want to try to draw pictures using just that material and nothing else to get in the way of the material. Just for the sake of learning what types of effects these tools can provide. A pencil has a multitude of effects that it can create, but without practicing, without giving it a shot, and by using other things like your fingers, you're not giving yourself the chance to really push it all the way through and find out what the full range or the full gamut of the tool's potential is. So every now and again I do come back to hatching. That's what I'm doing here. I'm hatching. And as I'm hatching up more tones, what I'm doing is I'm laying small patches of tone over small patches of tone and hoping that the overlap of each patch will create that smooth effect and get rid of any kind of abrasions or anything big and chunky that gets in the way between one part of the ball and the other part of the ball. I'm going back and forth between the darker side and the lighter side. As I build up more halftones in the light, it allows me to alter the darks in such a way so I can continue to keep the distance between the light and the dark ever present. The distance would be the dark side being evaluated